Not born again. Easy.
Man-made. These divisions, they are man-made. We have vice. We have vice, but we cannot see. We got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Cuban or Dominican or Panamanian. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Jamaican or American, Haitian or Brazilian. One Africa.
Where we bring go.
All around the
Together we stand, live and live all around.
One Africa.
You just celebrate,
All around the world. Get free. The time has come for us to get free. It's time we break the chains of slavery. We got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Mexican, Colombian, or Boricano. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Belizean or Peruvian, or Honduran. One Africa.
where we bring go.
All around the
Together we stand, live and live all around.
One Africa.
You just celebrate,
All around the world. They don't wanna see us unite. All they want us to do is keep on fussing and fighting. They don't wanna see us live together. All they want us to do is keep on killing one another all around the world. One Africa. 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 We got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black
What me say?
family.
Proud to be black, I'm an African. From higher heights, I'm a militant. West Africa, me from an Vatican. We were born with the light, we under the sun. Repatriation is a must if you liberate yourself. We tired of the war and fight. Cause there is nothing you can do. Know yourself and know your history. Work out for uplift to new life. Freedom we need. God, I'm a mother of civilization. Is to the world. One love, my religion. Together we are gonna build up the nation. No matter where you come from, we are one blood. Accept one another whenever you touch road. Listen me, see links to the globe. All for one for all, so the thing go.
We got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family.
Greetings, everyone. We're so excited for you all to join us and be in community for our Pan-African Weekly News. My name is Monica. This is my comrade Onyesawu. We are part of the African People's Revolutionary Party. We are part of the New Mexico chapter, which is in Tiwa territory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And We are excited for our program today around information around stopping Africom. Before we get started into the political education aspect, we want to just tell you a little bit about who we are, what this is, as well as we always call an ancestor in, and we also talk about whose land that we're on. So the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a socialist party. It was created in 1968 by Kwame Nkrumah, and it is focused on having a one unified socialist Africa. It's about the freedom of our people. We know once Africa is free, we will all be free. And we are also about African unity. So no matter where our people are, how we come together, and we're unified and building our own economic, social, political power for our people, because we know globally the economy has been built by the exploitation, the extraction, and the suffering of Africans all over. Additionally, this is Pan-African Weekly News. We started this in the pandemic of March of last year. And we started this because we knew that it was critical that people have information that was on COVID-19, as well as information that's happening to our people globally, locally. And so we are excited that we've been doing this weekly. Starting in November, we're going to be doing it bi-weekly, so more information to come on that. But we have been able to build community, been able to have guests share information, whether there are indigenous relatives, whether there are African relatives, whether there are Chicano relatives, been able to share information about organizing, lots of different topics, and most importantly, about the liberation of our people. We always call an ancestor in. That is critical, that is important to us. We wouldn't be where we are without our ancestors. They're always with us, they're always amongst us, and we fight for our people because of them. And also, they're always guiding us in this journey. And the ancestor we want to bring in today is Ya Ashantewa, whose birthday was in October. And so wanting to elevate her in this space. She was part of the Ashanti Empire, and she is so dope, y'all. I'm just letting you know. So what she did was during this time, British was trying to rule over the Ashanti people, and they also kidnapped the king and put the king in exile. And what she was able, and the people were they were afraid. And what the British governor was demanding is that they hand over their golden stool. And she was the gatekeeper. She was the keeper of the golden stool. And what it was an ancestral tradition that was passed on within the Ashanti people. And it would transfer power during their traditional ceremonies. So imagine the audacity for this British governor to want to take something away from the people that was so inherent in who they are as a people, right? Because what he was trying to do was disempower them as a people. And so the Ashanti people had a meeting, and they were talking about the fear. They were ready to give up, and she was like, no. And let me read you a little small part of her speech. She said, "I must say this. If you men of Ashanti will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight the white men." She said a lot more in there, lots of inspiration, staying in her boldness, staying in her courage, and the people fought against the British colonial rule. Herself and 15 others were captured during this time. And 3 years after she passed away, the king, as well as the people who were kept in exile, were released. So they were released. And so what's really important about this is we know in our fight for liberation and how our people fought for our liberation is they might not see it in their time, but it's so critical that we're fighting for the revolution. It's so critical that we're fighting for our people. We might not see it in our time, but the fruits of the labor that our ancestors have planted impact us. The fruits of our labor, indigenous people locally talk about like what we're doing is for 7 generations forward. And that's always stuck with me because we talk about how we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And so, and then also what happened was the Ashanti people, they gained their independence in 1957, right? And so again, the people of Ashanti who were fighting against colonization, they didn't see it, it didn't happen until like many, many years later. And that is what happens because it will fall. Colonization has to fall. Capitalism has to fall, and it can only do that if we're fighting for our people. So wanting to uplift our ancestor, Ya Ashatua, who was part of the Ashanti tribe in this space, and just wanting to always think about how we're always fighting for our people in all that we do. The next thing that we do on the show is we also do a land acknowledgement. And what's really critical about this is we're not doing this with words. We're doing it in our actions, in our everyday lives. We know that we are on stolen land. What many of you all know as United States is Turtle Island. This land is stolen. This land belongs to those the indigenous people, and anything that is stolen needs to be returned. We also know the land in Africa, very similar things that are happening there. That's the African, that's our land, it needs to be returned. Palestinian land, any land that has been stolen is critical. And this work has to happen in solidarity and together, because we know people of color, people who are colonized are impacted because of colonization and stolen land. So we acknowledge that not only are we on stolen land, that we're always in solidarity with our indigenous relatives fighting for their land back. And now I'm going to turn it over to Onyesawu, who's going to share some insights about some things that happened this week, as well as introduce our guests today.
Cool, thank you so much for that intro, Monica. Also want to say greetings to comrades Ricky, Comrade KD, Comrade Deborah, Comrade Big Teal. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Also, please like and share the stream to make sure we get more eyes on this very important conversation, particularly the interview that's coming in a moment. But just wanted to say some quick remarks on current events. We know that this week, the empire is commemorating the passing of a giant rat, of a war criminal, of a traitor to the African people and the oppressed nations all around the world, none other than Colin Powell, passed in his 80s from complications from COVID-19 because at that point he had cancer, he had a weakened immune system, he got the virus. He's old, it was a matter of time. But in the wake of his passing, we have seen the ruling class, the mainstream media, and liberals of all stripes clamoring to eulogize this man. And at the same time, we have seen dedicated and committed African revolutionaries being like, wait just a second. Wait just a second. Isn't this the man that bald-faced lied to the United Nations to justify George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq that led to the death of 1 million Iraqi people, including many, many, many kids? Isn't this the man who helped George Bush's daddy invade Iraq in the Gulf War in 1991? Isn't this the man that led the US invasion of Panama that saw the killing of dozens of poor and working class African people under Reagan in the 80s? Isn't this the man that co-signed the overthrow of John Bertrand RST two times while working as a puppet for the US military? Is this man not responsible for death and destruction brought down upon African and colonized peoples all over this planet? When did he become a hero? What is going on? Even people like so-called progressive U.S. House Representative from New York, Jamal Bowman, was talking about, I look up to Colin Powell. Who's that guy? A terrible African. Mark Lamont Hill, who at one time took a principal anti-Zionist position and then proceeded to spend a long time afterwards just making up for it with liberalism. Didn't he expressly look up to Colin Powell? Why are all these people who should know better, who call themselves progressive, celebrating this man with so much blood on his hands? And the other thing about it that drove me wild, that drove me insane, was that this very same week was the commemorations of the assassination of Maurice Bishop in Grenada at the hands of US-backed counter-revolutionaries, and the mysterious death of Samora Michel of Frelimo in a plane crash in the 80s. These two heroes of the African Revolution also passed the same week, and they get not a fraction of the coverage, even from our own people, about their passing. So why is it that traitors of our race, people who align themselves at every possible turn throughout their entire lives with our oppressors, are celebrated by our people? I can understand why CNN loves Colin Powell. I can understand why so-called progressive and liberal and social justice-minded African people are celebrating Colin Powell. He's really just the earlier iteration of the Obama effect. He was a person who, at a time when our people were resisting empire, stood up and stood beside it. He told us to fall in line behind our oppressors. He is not a man that should be celebrated. He is a man whose name should be spit on, even in death, especially in death, as all these entities are lying on him. We have the responsibility to tell the truth. We have the responsibility to say that if you align with the empire against the masses of African and oppressed people all around the world, we will not forgive you. We will tell the truth about you. And we will spit on your name. So consider that what I just did. I just want to say very briefly, screw that guy. He is no hero to African people. He is a traitor to humanity, a traitor to us. So I'm trying not to swear, so I'm going to stop it right there. Anyway, so yeah, just really wanted to say that very quickly. I had to get off my chest. But anyway, as Monica mentioned, we are going to do political education on this show, as we do every single episode and every single APRP piece of content. For PE today, we are very excited to have a special guest with us. His name is Tunde Osazua. He is the coordinator of the US Out of Africa Network and a member of the Black Alliance for Peace's Africa team. Hello, Tunde.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
We are very grateful that you're here. October is Black Alliance for Peace's month of action to shut down Africom. You are at the heart of that campaign, and so we're really excited that you're going to talk to our audience about it. But to open up the conversation, let's talk about who is Tunde Osazua and how did you come into the movement?
Yeah, so, I'm 26 years old. I'm an African, currently on Muskogee land here in Atlanta, Georgia. But yeah, like you said, I'm a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, or BAP, which is focused on revitalizing the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. I'm on BAP's Africa team, like you said as well, that leads BAP's political analysis around U.S. policy toward Africa in general and Africom in particular. And so it helps develop, it helps BAP kind of develop public positions with regards to the continent. I'm also the coordinator of the US Out of Africa Network, which is a network of volunteers and organizations that are committed to pursuing strategies and tactics for the complete withdrawal of US forces from Africa, the demilitarization of the African continent, the closure of US military bases throughout the world. And we're also calling for the Congressional Black Caucus to unequivocally oppose Africom and conduct hearings on its impact on the African continent with the full participation of, African civil society as well as US civil society. So, those are some of the things I do. I'm also on the BAP membership and program support team to help with, various operational things and programming. And help coordinate different structures. But I came into the movement as a student activist, working on things like campus prison divestment campaigns or the singular campaign. And then I was also a part of Students for Justice in Palestine. Also worked with orgs off of campus while in college, and I joined BAP actually soon after I graduated college. But yeah, it was really just learning about the struggles of the millions of Africans that, came before us, right? And got us to where we are today, that inspired me to get involved with movement work. I think, just trying to contribute to this centuries-long effort to achieve the liberation of our people. I think that's so important. And that's kind of like how I came in and why I'm, so involved, I guess, or not so involved, but why I'm trying so hard to contribute.
Thank you so much, Tunde. That's so beautiful being able to hear about your journey and what called you to the movement and some of the work that you have done. Thank you and all the work that you're doing, as well as members of Black Alliance for Peace, and wanting like this space to be to elevate and uplift the work. So what is the US empire, what is the US military doing in Africa?
Yeah, and I also want to say thank y'all for all the work y'all do. I've learned so much from this show. So yeah, just it's a real honor to be on here. But yeah, in terms of what the U.S. military is doing in Africa, I think we can say that the military is just pursuing the interests of U.S. empire and multinational corporations. Right? It works to impose U.S. control of African, land and resources and people. Right? And that's all in the service of multinational corporations and the wealthy in the United States. And I think, just to contextualize that, it's important to understand the historical legacy that is involved here, right? Like colonial powers have pursued military conquest or used military conquest in service of capital accumulation or profit, rather, for centuries. Right? They sent in troops to aid the efforts of some of the early Western corporations. For example, the Royal African Company shipped more African slaves to the Americas than any other company in the history of the Atlantic slave trade. Right? So its original purpose, that Royal African Company, was to exploit the gold fields in the around the Gambia River. But it soon, developed and led the brutal and sustained slave trade. And I think, I think that's instructive because military expeditions were so essential in clearing the way for that company and driving out the Dutch who were competing with the English or the British to establish favorable trading relations with the local rulers. The Royal African Company also operated from military forts based along the coast, right? So from Morocco down all the way to Azania, South Africa, right? And so I think that speaks to the historical legacy, and even up through today, you see similar, I guess, relationships and similar setups, right? Like this legacy of serving the interests of corporations is carried on through Africom, right? Which we're talking about now. Right, like in 2007, the Department of Defense came to a decision that there was a need for some sort of military command to make sure that the strategic importance of Africa was reflected in U.S. policy, and the U.S. was putting enough resources behind the effort to kind of control or terrorize the continent. Right, so they directed or instructed George W. Bush, to direct the creation of it. But we know that U.S. military presence in Africa didn't begin with Africom, but I think Africom brings like a better coordination and strategic focus for realizing the goals of U.S. imperialism in Africa. So, in 2008, right, October 1st, that's the day we kind of point to as the beginning of Africom, and also the beginning of a new scramble for Africa, right? So it's part of the US's effort to dominate the world, right? Like Africom is one of 11 military commands that they've divided the world up into. And so Africom has jurisdiction over the continent. But I think, we have to understand that, that this new scramble for Africa is related to what took place in the 1800s, right? From like 1881 to 1914, and was basically part of the struggle between different European powers or colonial powers to dominate the continent and occupy it and colonize it, right? So this time the US is competing with the likes of France, the UK, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, India, the UAE, China, especially, right? I think China and Russia are the most antagonistic, or that's what we hear about through, Western media, right? In terms of like they love to demonize China and Russia and talk about how they're the one, like China is colonizing the continent, Russia's colonizing the continent. But we know that's the legacy of Western powers, Western colonial powers, and those are the real colonizers. I think they're very much threatened by the likes of China and Russia because they can't control them as easily. Anyway, I think it's also important to point out that the U.S. is competing with folks that it says are its allies, right? Like France, for example. The U.S. is working with France on different military initiatives and military efforts, but they're in competition because it's capitalism, right? Like U.S. companies are competing with French companies for resources, for profits, and it's a similar idea in terms of their militaries competing for dominance on the continent. So I think those are just some things I wanted to point to. I also wanted to say that there are 46 various forms of U.S. bases on the continent, as well as military-to-military relations between 53 out of the 54 African countries in the United States. And I think we should also call out that those African countries that have allowed U.S. troops to occupy them essentially are under the control of the U.S. empire. They've relinquished their sovereignty, and I think a major goal of that is to prevent any independent African force from emerging. And so the U.S. wants to maintain hegemony, so they're very much focused on destroying any sort of African liberation project or any sort of like movement or just subverting the will of the people is a big part of the purpose of Africom. One thing we also talk about a lot is like terrorism, right? Like the Africom, they say that they're trying to fight terrorism, but we know that that's not the case, right? Like the purpose of Africom is to leave Africa in a constant state of war and instability so that these corporations can more easily access resources and control, or have access to people and land and waterways and things like that. So I think, we have to be aware that, before 9/11, the US didn't think that terrorism was an issue on the African continent. Like that's written in a lot of their documents, but with the emergence of the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, the more recent ones, we've seen that this issue of terrorism has become a big selling point for Africom, and I think it's important to point out the contradictory nature of that selling point, just because we know that since the establishment of Africom, the incidences of like terrorist attacks have increased fivefold. That's really all I had on that question.
Thank you, and thank you for pointing out that even though Africom is sold as being a counterterrorism effort for the security of Africa, it's actually creating conditions of insecurity and violence and leading to the proliferation of terrorism across the continent. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the impact of Africom on the massive African people on the continent. What impact does Africom have on our liberation struggles in Africa?
Yeah, so I think a big part of Africom is the militarization it carries out, right? Like it trains African police and military in counterinsurgency tactics and measures to confront mass uprisings against repression, right? Because these African countries are often led by neocolonial leaders that need to repress their people in order to, maintain the state of affairs that benefit them. So I think what we see with Africom is that they train these African security forces to more effectively repress the people and repress liberatory movements, right? And so I think it's useful to draw an analogy between the militarization on the continent and the militarization here in the U.S., right? So BAP often talks about how Africom is the counterpart to the US domestic 1033 program that militarizes local police here in the US and especially in Black and Brown communities. So during the reign of Barack Obama, there was a 1,900% increase in the US military equipment transferred to local police forces. And then a 2,400% increase in the value of military equipment or the presence of military forces on the continent in that same period, right? So there's this, militarization that's taking place and it's rapid, right? Like it's very intense, and Obama was at the forefront of that, right? And so we also like to point to, the historical context in the sense that police militarization was first established to put an end to Black liberatory movements of the 1960s and 70s with, the advent of like special weapons and tactics units or SWAT teams or whatever. And, the same weapons and tactics that the Pentagon developed for their occupations, coups, and wars on Africans and other colonized people around the world are used to terrorize African or Black people here in the United States, right? And our uprisings, right? Like it's used to control us and prevent us from, rising up and really fighting for our liberation, right? So this repression is so necessary, right? Like I mentioned briefly about like the neo-colonial leaders who are really just, leaders who don't act in the interests of their people, right? Like they're very much beholden to the former colonial powers in a lot of ways. And so I think, the repression that Africom, contributes to on the continent and the 1033 program contributes to here, since we also have neo-colonial leaders, we could speak about our mayors and our Congress people and our heads of state, even like Obama, I would even consider a neo-colonial leader, and others, right? I think, that the repression is necessary to continue the state of affairs, the control that the US and other Western powers have over colonized people, right? So the brutal repression that we see on the continent, that we see with, uprisings here is so necessary to maintain this, right? And so we can point to so many different examples of that. I think we could look at, the independent, like we mentioned, the Black liberatory movements of the 60s and 70s, or even the 50s, right? Where the US was involved in taking out Patrice Lumumba, right? Who was the first, leader of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is, filled with so many, valuable resources and so many, just such a strong populace. And I think, that assassination that the U.S. and its partners carried out was crucial, right? And we could say the same for like Kwame Nkrumah, right, who was overthrown in a CIA orchestrated coup. Like, both of them were involved in fighting for the liberation of African people, right? And I think, we could look at military aid that the U.S. gives to folks in Rwanda and Uganda with like Museveni and Kagame, right? More neo-colonial leaders, and their efforts as like proxies in the war on the Congo to this day, right? I think the number that we often see is that like 6 million people died between like 1998 and 2007. And we're in the middle of Congo Week right now, that the Friends of the Congo, an organization that is all about, advocating for Congolese people. I think that really speaks to the ongoing nature of the repression and how, we need to raise awareness about these things. And so, even as recently as 2018, right, like thousands of Ghanaian people rallied in the streets of their capital. I think we see, African people protesting constantly. We don't see it in the popular media, but it's happening, right? So, yesterday, right, like there was a commemoration of the massacre, or not a commemoration, but there was a remembrance of the massacre that took place in Nigeria at the Lekki toll gate, right? And that was focused on that protest last year was focused on police brutality, because there's a notorious police unit named SARS, which is like kind of like our SWAT, right? The Special Weapons and Tactics Unit. I think we can see this repression, this brutal and deadly repression, is really just a tool of the people who, the white rulers, as some might say, a tool of imperialism. So that's kind of how I would answer that.
And really, like, the primary purpose of Africom in that respect is to make sure to protect African land and resources from African people, to retain control of our wealth by repressing us. So I feel like that's really important for people to understand.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And also in the comments, Big Till's talking about like the importance and appreciation for you making the connection of what's happened in Africom around militarization and what's also happening in the US empire around militarization. So we see it as connected, right? It's impacting our people, whether it's on Africa, on the continent, or whether it's here in the US empire. So that connection is important for us to see, which is why like the repression is so heavy, right? In African movements as well. You talked about like so many different layers. Could you also share about how should we engage Africans serving in the US military, the Department of Defense, and other arms of imperialism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think making that connection that you were talking about is so important. We have to see the war, waged against Africans here in the US, Africans and other colonized people, I guess, in the US, as like a mirror of the war waged against Africans on the continent and around the world. Africans and other, nationally oppressed people, workers and farmers, right? So we have to see those as part of the same oppressive structure. And I think beyond that, we know that Africa is the homeland of African people, not just on the continent, but around the world. So that includes Africans here in the US, African Black people here in the US. So I think that's an important thing to understand as well. So, we're part of the African nation, right? Like, as Africans in the US, we have a responsibility to fight against these wars, to fight against US imperialism, Western imperialism, through organization, building solidarity with other Africans and other oppressed people engaged in that struggle, right? So when you say, people fighting or people who are working on behalf of imperialism, I think of folks like Obama or like Condoleezza Rice or, Colin Powell that you were talking about earlier on your song. I really appreciated that, right? Because those are like, probably some of the more famous Africans who have, acted on behalf of imperialism, and they've committed so many atrocities, right? Like you spoke to already, right? They sold out, their fellow Africans in pursuit of, I guess, maybe striving to get ahead or careers. And I don't know what was in their heads or what their motivations were necessarily, but they proved themselves to be of service to the powerful, right? The ruling class, some might say, right? So I think that is antithetical almost to like that's kind of the opposite of what we should be really doing, right? We should be trying to defend our communities from the ravages of imperialism, right? Not carrying out those atrocities that imperialism necessitates. So I think that perspective is not common. I think a lot of folks are, like you were saying, praising, the likes of Colin Powell, and people love Obama and Condoleezza Rice. I think, that's just the worldview that we're taught to have. I was watching the drone warfare Hood Communist episode earlier today, and I really liked what you said on Insanu about, how it's like an assault, like the propaganda machine assaults us with, all this nonsense, all these lies and just trash about like what we should be engaged in, like how we should think, right? And so I think I don't know who it was who said this, but I know there's a quote that's like the ideas of the ruling class or something, or the ideas of the time, right? Like that's those are the popular ideas of the time. So we are, kind of fed ruling class ideas, ruling class ideology. And, unless you're like actively working to think things through and like kind of subvert that, you might, fall victim to it, right? And want to be a servant of imperialism like Obama and Rice and Powell. So I think, as we think about how we engage our people around this, right? Like folks who might want to, join the military or just be part of the Department of Defense or be president or whatever, right? I think we have to, just try and put out contrary ideas to what the CNNs or MSNBCs or the Fox News are putting out, right? Like I think that y'all do a great job of that here with Weekly Pan-African News. The communists, there's so many other outlets. I think they're trying to like build consciousness or put out ideas that are contrary to the imperialist order or whatever. But yeah, I think it's our job to explain these things to the people in our communities, because not everyone is being reached by these things, right? Like I think we have to go out and talk to people, and maybe it's through organization too that can happen, right? Like we have to do we have to engage in mass outreach or campaigns to just reach our people, because so many of them are still victim to the assault that the propaganda machine is carrying out on all of us. So I think that's kind of how I would see that. I think we need to really think about how do we reach our people so that they aren't going against their own interests, right? And that they understand that we are also oppressed people, right? Like the US is bombing folks across the world. It's militarizing our own communities and violently repressing us, but that's connected to the drone strikes that take place in Kabul, Afghanistan, or the efforts to commit genocide in Palestine or in Yemen, right? So I think we have to see our struggle as connected, right? Like Somalia, right? The massive drone strike campaign that took place last year, and there have been a good number already this year, right? Like I think we need to see that as an assault on our own people. Like those are our fellow Africans that the US is bombing, right? That the US is murdering, that is massacring. So I think it's important for us to understand that we're connected to them, that the war on them is a mirror image of the war on us, and that we need to build a movement. We need to get organized to fight back against imperialism.
You basically already answered the next question, but just want to know if there's anything else you would like to say about what responsibility us as African people living in the United States have to Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Africans, right, like we are, like we owe a debt to our homeland, right? Like we were taken from our homeland, and we are kind of still part of that struggle for liberation of our homeland. Like so many have come before us and have acted and fought on behalf of African struggle because they saw the need for our liberation. They recognized that we are an oppressed, colonized people, and that it really takes fighting back, right, to win our liberation. And I think to me, like our duty is to take up the mantle, right, to try and be part of that struggle for the liberation of Africa, right? And I think we need to see that as a struggle for the liberation of African people in the U.S., struggle for the liberation of African people in Haiti, African people in Colombia, in in the UK, African people everywhere, right? Like, I think we need to see it as our struggle is to liberate Africa, right? Like, I think that is, and obviously there are already so many Africans engaged in that struggle today, right? So I think it's building connections with those people that are struggling, right? And figuring out how we can struggle here in support of that broader effort to free us all, right? Like, and it's not just Africans, right? Like, we're connected to other colonized people, but I think in terms of our debt to the African continent, it's important for us to stress that we're Africans, right? And we're just separated by some by bodies of water or space, but I think we need to see their struggle as our struggle, and figure out how we can contribute, no matter what that looks like, right? Like, not everyone has the same skills, so I think everyone has some sort of skill or some sort of something that they can contribute. So I think we just need to figure out how to fit into this effort to liberate Africa.
That's so beautiful. And you talked about like how important our role is, especially being here in the US empire, and how we all can contribute toward the shutting down of Africom. And wanting to see if you could elaborate a little bit, what can we do to contribute to the movement to shut down Africa? And if you can restate, because you talked about it earlier, what are the demands of shutting down Africom?
Yeah. And yeah, I like that you mentioned the fact that we're here in the US. I forgot to mention that too, but yeah, I think being in the middle of empire, we can do a whole lot to cripple imperialism, and I think we benefit to an extent. But anyway, I think that what you mentioned is so important in terms of shutting down Africom. There's already some work that's been done in terms of starting to try to build that movement to shut it down, right? Like the Black Lives for Peace's Africa team and the US Out of Africa Network has been engaged in the campaign US Out of Africa Shut Down Africom since October 1st, 2018. And so that's an ongoing campaign until the demands are met. But this month of October is the International Month of Action on Africom. And we chose October because we see October 1st of 2008 as the day that Africom was actually established. So we chose this month just to think through like the history there, and we've been carrying out a lot of actions in support of the demands, right, which are for the complete withdrawal of US forces from Africa, the demilitarization of the African continent, the closure of US bases throughout the world, and that the Congressional Black Caucus should hold hearings and oppose Africom, obviously, and hold the hearings on Africom's impact on the African continent, along with the full participation of the civil society here in the US, as well as African civil society. So those are the demands, and I think this month was really just to kind of highlight those demands, to push them out, and then also just to raise awareness of what Africom is, what it's doing. And I really appreciate y'all, hosting so much or putting a lot of attention on Africom and the month of action. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do as well. But we have a lot of events or I guess ways that folks have taken action during the month, and there's still time in October so folks can participate. But we had a webinar on October 1st that brought together members of different organizations and movements on the continent that are fighting back against Africom, and they spoke about their struggles against it on the continent. We've had a number of teach-ins, and we have a lot more coming this month. And that's not just here in the US. There are organizations on the continent who are organizing teach-ins and have held teach-ins And so, our thing is like, a lot of folks don't know what Africom is or don't know how it operates. So we're focused more on the educational aspect. But I think we also want to move towards some, direct action more type efforts. So there are folks holding like banner drops and doing other things in support of the month. But beyond, this month, right? I think folks should consider joining the US and NATO Network, which is the organizing arm of the campaign. And then, BAP as well. But then, also organizations that are, talking about this issue, right? Like the AAPRP or Friends of the Congo or others, right? There are a good number more. And so I think that would be a way for folks to get even more information and figure out how to get involved. And I think the other piece, is that this campaign is part of a broader effort to close U.S. Foreign bases everywhere and demilitarize the continent and the world. So I think we recognize that Africa is primary, at least the BAP Africa team does. But I think we also understand that U.S. militarism is one of the primary obstacles to the liberation of, oppressed people anywhere. So I think that's important. But yeah, I would just recommend folks consider, joining an organization and participating in the month of action by attending events, maybe even thinking about putting on their own teach-in or event, because there are a lot of resources that folks can check out on the BAP website, blacklinesforpeace.com/Africom 2021. And I think, we're just trying to get active, to build relationships with other folks who are interested in, taking on this work and, just really building that movement so we can actually shut down Africom. I think everyone should join the effort to defeat imperialism. And this is one way to fight back. And yeah, I really recommend that folks figure out what that way that they want to take on is.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tunde, for your answers today, for the knowledge you dropped. I learned a lot. I'm sure Monica did too. Also, shout out to Black Alliance for Peace for spending so much time and effort spreading such good explanations about U.S. imperialism in Africa, but U.S. imperialism also like all over the world. Like BAP is like second to none for me in terms of accessible analysis of imperialism, and that's because of work like you. I mean, people like you, the work of people like you. So, yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I appreciate y'all. No, I learned a lot from y'all over the past year or so. So definitely really appreciate y'all in the AAPRP.
Thank you so much, Tunde. And we also dropped information on links and how folks can get involved, as well as the calendars. And we dropped it in YouTube as well as Facebook. And again, deep appreciation. I learned so much. I took notes as well. Have to go back and watch it just in case I missed anything, but appreciate you.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
And folks, make sure to visit blackallianceforpeace.com to learn more about that.
Awesome. And now what we're going to do is jump into some updates here in Tiwa territory. So our Pan-African Community Garden, we're going to have a couple more events coming up before the closure of the year, and we'll be relaunching in the spring. And this Sunday at 4:00 at the Pan-African Garden, what we're going to be doing is winterizing the space. So we're going to be cleaning the fences, doing some wood putty, getting everything ready so that the following week we can paint the fence. So come out and join us. Come in clothes you can get dirty in. Also, we're going to be grilling food. So we'll be grilling veggies, building community together. Come out while it's a little still warm, where we can break bread. We're also going to be talking about, the PE topic is about Cuba, as well as and the embargo. So we're going to be able to learn and share together as well. So come out. We're excited to see you all this Sunday at 4 p.m. in Tiwa territory. The elder care program, we also launched during the pandemic, making sure elders were able to have access to resources as well as food and political education. And so if you know an elder who might be interested in receiving a care package, let us know. We deliver every Saturday since the beginning of the pandemic. The other thing we want to invite you to, we are always in solidarity with Cuba, and we're doing the caravan, which happens the last Sunday of the month. So this month it's happening on Halloween. We're going to be changing our meetup site. So our meetup site is on San Mateo and Copper. We're going to be meeting at noon. You can come dressed up as someone in the Cuba Revolution. Onyesawu, who you coming as?
I'm going to be Carlotta, the African woman who led an enslaved African uprising in the 1800s.
Beautiful. So you can come dress up, be in community with us. Here's some political education. We're going to do a caravan to Robinson Park. Our comrades at John Brown Breakfast Club is going to be cooking and sharing food. There'll be vegan options too. So come out again in solidarity of Cuba, calling out to end the embargo and be in community. The other thing we're excited to share on November 11th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, there's going to be a panel hosted by the Anti-War Coalition. It's around anti-communists as well as being against imperialism. Come join that panel. There'll be more information and flyers shared at the end of this show. And I'm going to turn it over to Onyesawu for closing us out for the day.
We're going to be at just about an hour. It's very impressive. I'm impressed. But thank y'all so much for joining us for Weekly Pan-African News. Thank you to our comrades at Black Alliance for Peace, particularly Tunde Osazua, for joining us today and dropping so much knowledge. This has been Weekly Pan-African News. We do this program every single Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Beginning in November, we're going to be doing it twice a month, Thursday, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. That means that we will be back next week with another show topic. And I am trying to stall so I can pull up what it is. Actually, I'll do it afterwards when this finishes loading. But in the meantime, it's still a pandemic, y'all. It's still a pandemic. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the Democrats, the Republicans are trying to act like it's a pandemic of the so-called unvaccinated. The reality is that it's a pandemic for everybody. There are still thousands of people dying from COVID-19 in the United States every single week. We are still seeing kids being taken out by this virus because the Biden administration sent them back to school unvaccinated. We are still seeing people losing their housing, losing their jobs in record numbers, thanks to the fallout, the economic fallout of this pandemic. So understand it is not over. Understand, even though you are probably very, very, very tired of this, I know that I am, I'm sure Monica is, it's not over, y'all. We got to continue to wear our masks. We got to continue to social distance. We got to get vaccinated if we feel comfortable doing so. But first of all, most importantly, we have to organize to demand the kind of pandemic response that's going to actually keep people alive. Like the eviction moratorium should never have ended. The unemployment assistance extension should never have ended. There should have been like a dozen more stimulus checks, like at minimum. Like there should have just been way more protection for people who could not go to work without getting sick. Unfortunately, we've been abandoned and we're going to continue to be abandoned until we are organized enough and powerful enough as a collective to demand the pandemic response that's required. And as we've said many times on the show, COVID-19 is here to stay, but COVID-19 is far from the last time that we are going to experience the global outbreak of a deadly virus and the consequences of being a capitalist system that will not protect us. This is the trajectory that capitalist destruction of the environment signed us up for. This is the trajectory we will remain. This is the trajectory we will remain on until we are organized enough to build a better system. So I am asking you, comrades, if you are not active in an organization fighting for justice, get active in an organization fighting for justice. Join one in your community. I guarantee you there's one that definitely needs help. If the organization you want to see does not exist, then feel free to build that organization. You don't need permission. You don't need special skills or knowledge. You just need a couple of friends and a willingness to learn together and apply what you learned in the real world to change your community. But either way, we need not just an eviction moratorium, but rent forgiveness for millions of people. We need stimulus checks. We need nationalized health care. We need people to be able to take time off work and not be devastated by that choice if it's going to be the safest one. And so to get all of that, we need a movement strong enough to demand it, which means requires all of us being active in organizations fighting for justice, period. Anywho, it's pulled up finally. So please join us next Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to be talking about why we do not call the police and why we must understand police as part of the overall global system of imperialism oppressing us all. So tune in next week for that. Also, it is Thursday, which means there's new articles on the Hood Communist blog. You can check them out at hoodcommunist.org. And at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time today, we're going to have another bi-weekly live chat in the Hood Communist Telegram. We're going to be talking more about Africom and the need for revolutionary internationalism and movements for African liberation. So please join us. It's t.me/hoodcommunist, or just join the Hood Communist Telegram channel to participate in the conversation. But we hope to see you there, 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you have a good rest of your afternoon. And stay tuned for some jams and some flyers for upcoming events.
This cut is that Mau Mau, that 21st century anti-colonial propaganda. Candace Antique, Pan-Africana, Fanti Confederation.
Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, You either running to it or you're running from it. Tell me, brother, where you're running? You're either running scared or you're running free. Tell me, sister, how you running? If you're the big tree and I'm the small legs, chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away. Call me timber. Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, Only way to kill a beast to attack the root. Pull it up from the ground and destroy the fruit. You're either telling lies or you're telling truth. Tell me, brother, sister, what do you do? If you're the big tree and I'm the small legs, chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away. Call me timber. Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, Off with this head, off with this head, off with this head, off with this head. I cut you down with my machete. I cut you down with my machete, Almost out of time. Gotta free your mind. Almost out of time. Gotta feed the minds. Everything we do today. Sow the seeds for the next day. Sow the seed for the next day. The next day, the next day. Almost out of time. Gotta free your mind. Almost out of time. Gotta feed the minds. Everything we do today. Sow the seeds for the next day. Sow the seeds for the next day. The next day, the next day. Off with this